Here's a guy who thinks that atheism has a fatal flaw.
So someone said to me that most atheists aren't materialist, they're naturalist. Well, when in the definitions of these terms, then maybe they are distinct. But in practice, these naturalism and materialism in practice are pretty much the same.
No, they're not. Materialism is the idea that only matter exists. Naturalism is the position that the supernatural does not exist. Materialism is clearly false because space-time and non-material energy clearly exist, despite not being matter. A better term is physicalism, which is the idea that only physical things exist and not just matter.
Plus, it's on the atheist, actually, it's on the materialist to actually justify these non-material things.
I don't see why we have to justify anything, but if you want us to justify our belief in space-time and energy, they're pretty easy to see all around you all the time. That's a pretty robust justification for believing in them.
On a naturalist worldview. So it's actually on the atheist. Oftentimes atheists forget. Atheists say that, oh well, I just lack belief, so I don't have to justify anything. Well, that doesn't actually work when we criticize your worldview, your metaphysical assumptions, then you actually have to justify those things.
Why? I could see having to justify my beliefs if I'm trying to convince you to believe them. I'm not going to convince you of anything if I don't justify what I'm trying to convince you to believe. However, since I'm not trying to convince you of anything, what do I have to justify and why?
And the second thing, morality. Now, I'm not trying to be rude, but most atheists were actually agreeing with me that on atheism, there's no objective morality.
So what? Why would morality need to be objective? Why would it even matter whether morality is or is not objective? I'm going to do what my conscience forces me to do, whether it conforms to any objective standard of morality or not. So the existence or non-existence of any such standard is entirely inconsequential with respect to my behavior.
But I had a couple atheists argue with me that objective morality exists, and the justification for objective morality is that it's common sense. They said to me, objective morality is common sense, you shouldn't steal, and so on, that it's just common sense to be a good person, and that's their justification for objective morality. But that doesn't actually, saying that it's common sense doesn't actually work as a justification.
Saying morality comes from God also doesn't work as a justification because even if there is a God who dictates morality to us, there is still no objective, non-circular reason why we ought to obey what God tells us. Why is it moral to do what God says? What justifies that moral precept? If the reason why it's moral to do what God says is because God says so, then your argument is circular.
And then finally, some people said to me that I cannot criticize atheism. Atheism is just a lack of belief in God, that I can't even criticize the position. So you have a position that cannot even be criticized. Well, this is actually false because atheism works as a foundation for your worldview.
No, it doesn't. None of my views about the world are predicated on the non-existence of God. Rather, I infer the non-existence of God from much more fundamental logical principles. Atheism is a product of my worldview, not the foundation of it. I don't start my reasoning with the fundamental assumption that God does not exist. Atheism is a conclusion I have drawn, not a given premise from which I draw conclusions.
And there's only certain places that you can go with that foundation. And if we critique these places that you can go, we can actually see that atheism as a foundation does not work.
What conclusions do you think I'm drawing from atheism?
But now let's get into the topic of this video, which is basically that atheism leads to materialism.
Why would atheism cause me to believe that time and space don't exist?
And, to put it simply, it just means, atheism rejects every kind of supernatural thing.
I'm an atheist because I'm a naturalist, not the other way around. Atheism doesn't even entail naturalism. You can believe in the supernatural without believing in God. Being an atheist doesn't preclude believing in magic and ghosts.
But when you have no supernatural things, then you have to explain everything through natural causes, which are, pretty much their materialist causes.
No, you don't have to explain everything through natural causes because it is entirely natural for some events to occur without any causes at all. Physical events are not entirely deterministic. There is an element of spontaneity and chance in some physical systems.
And this leads then to materialism or naturalism. They're pretty much the same, to be honest.
No, they're not. And the idea that there's no supernatural things doesn't lead to naturalism. It is naturalism.
And if you disagree, you say that, well, naturalism actually includes these non-physical things, then you actually have to justify those non-physical things.
What non-physical things? I'm not just a naturalist, I also believe physicalism is true, which means I don't believe there's any such thing as non-physical things. Everything is fundamentally time, space, and energy. What could possibly exist that is not reducible to those elements?
On your naturalistic, atheistic worldview. So then, if everything is materialist, then did your brains evolve to deceive you?
Yeah, in at least some cases they did. It's advantageous to be deceived sometimes. Take, for example, contrast illusions. Our brains create these illusions because it's easier to navigate the world if we perceive shades relative to other shades rather than absolutely. If you believe that God created our brains, then God made our brains to deceive us.
Believe it or not, we still don't know what causes it. All we know is that somehow, somewhere in the brain, we forfeit truth for exaggerated contrast difference. Recent studies have suggested that we may be born to make this mistake, and that makes sense. It may be an error, but it may also help us more quickly distinguish features in the environment. Natural selection may have favored this over accuracy because sometimes it's more important to live than to see reality as it is.
A common apologist argument is the evolutionary argument against naturalism. It says that if evolution created our brains, we can't be certain that our beliefs are true because evolution would create a brain that prioritizes survival advantage over knowing the truth. However, given the fact that we experience this advantageous illusion, it's clear that if we were created by God, it was actually God that created our brains to prioritize survival over truth.
Can you actually have knowledge? So in atheism, this is actually a real problem.
How would the existence of God solve that problem? It looks as though our brains are deceiving us whether they were created by God or not. Do you think that the existence of God makes humans cognitively infallible? If we are infallible, then how is it possible for any illusions to exist? If we are not infallible, then we have reason to doubt that knowing the truth is possible for us even if there is a God.
How do you know that your brains are not deceiving you?
My brain is deceiving me, and if my brain was created by God, then God made it to deceive me.
And this actually goes hand to hand with the next thing that I'm going to say, which is even more powerful in my opinion. Free will doesn't exist on materialism.
Not true. I don't believe that free will exists, but that has nothing to do with materialism or naturalism or physicalism. There are perfectly natural physical events which are non-deterministic. Free events don't require God or anything else that's supernatural. The reason I don't believe in free will is that everything that happens in our brains seems to be entirely deterministic, but that's not true of all natural events. Free will is possible under naturalism, there's just no convincing evidence for it.
If everything is the result of prior physical causes,
everything is not the result of prior physical causes. This is not because there is any such thing as non-physical causes or supernatural causes. It's because some things happen without any cause at all.
Then so are your brain neurons firing, and so are the actions that you then take. So then you don't really have free will in any meaningful sense.
Right, but that's not because naturalism is true.
And then you cannot even be held accountable for your moral actions. So I think this goes very nicely with moral relativism.
Exactly the opposite is true. It is only to the extent that decisions are determined that there is any point in holding people accountable for them. The only reason to hold somebody accountable for their actions is so we can impose incentives and disincentives upon them. It's so we can influence their future behavior. We can only influence people's behavior if there is at least some degree of deterministic causal interaction between incentives, disincentives, and behavior. If a person's choices are entirely free of any causal influence, it is then that holding them accountable is pointless, because doing so will have no effect on shaping their future behavior.
Well, morals don't really exist, but even if you say that they exist, you cannot hold anyone accountable for them if they don't even have free will.
If someone's choices are completely free of causal influence, then holding them accountable will have absolutely no consequences with respect to their behavior. It is only if someone has completely free will that it becomes completely and utterly pointless to hold them accountable for their actions.
And now some atheists try to escape this by saying that they don't believe in determinism, and they talk about quantum fluctuations and stuff, that everything isn't actually the result of prior physical causes, but there are things like quantum fluctuations, for example. But this doesn't really give you free will in any meaningful sense.
I agree, because those quantum fluctuations don't seem to play any detectable role in how our brains function, certainly not with respect to the processes by which we make decisions.
Because those quantum fluctuations are random, and then if they are random, they don't give any meaningful free will for you.
I wouldn't say random, I would say spontaneous. They happen without cause. But if decisions that have causes are not free, and decisions which don't have causes are also not free, then what kind of decision is free? What's the third option? Even if it's non-physical supernatural souls that make decisions rather than our physical brains, then the decisions our souls make are either caused and not free, or they are not caused and apparently also not free. So if uncaused decisions are also not free, then free will is altogether impossible whether the supernatural exists or not. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.